Welcome to All Things Fun Hydrographics. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how long the hydro dipping process takes, what makes it take longer than normal, and we're going to be talking about what times of the year we're busier than others. Stick around, we'll tell you all about it. If you've been around the channel for a while, you know that I don't do anything scripted. Everything is just I get in front of the camera and start talking. Today, I actually made some notes. We're going to see if we can get through this without 14 hours of bloopers. I'm semi-hopeful, but we'll see. So let's start by talking about the actual hydro dipping process and how long it typically takes. So the very first thing that we have to do before we can start on your project is order all the materials. We do stock some materials here that we use on a frequent basis, but most stuff we order per job. Reason for that is this stuff does not last forever. Film has a life and paint has a life. After a certain time, either paint starts to harden or film starts to go bad. That's why we don't order stuff in gigantic bulk and keep it all here. We order it per project. Now, depending on where the materials are come from, some can be here as quick as a couple of days. Sometimes it takes up to a week or more, just depending on where it's coming from and the courier that's being used. Lately, UPS has been really good about getting our stuff here quick. FedEx, not so much. The post office, oh my God, I don't even know why anybody ships with the post office anymore. They are ridiculous. So the very first thing that we have to do before we can do anything in a hydro dipping process is we have to clean your project. Now, if you're sending a firearm, that means removing all of the oil, grease, whatever other kind of lube stuff that you use to make your firearm nice and slick. Sometimes that process can take up to 24 hours because we may have to soak your stuff in acetone and bake it just to get all of those oils out. Car parts are much the same and sometimes can take even longer, especially things like valve covers that people pull from a junkyard and bring us that are absolutely soaked in oil. But with what we do, prep is key, so all that stuff has to come off. Usually we can get that done in a day or less. The next step is going to be getting prepped for sandblasting. This is going to include taping off parts that we don't want to get paint on them or don't want to be sandblasted, plugging bolt holes, sealing up threads so threads on small parts don't get coated in paint, and like in the case of firearms where we have to plug each end of the barrel to make sure that we don't get any sandblasting material inside the chamber and inside the barrel. Depending on the complexity of the parts and how many there are, this can take several minutes up to several hours just depending on what you sent. For our business, we do a ton of firearms, so we usually are in the hour to 2 hour range to get everything prepped and ready for sandblasting on firearms. The next step is going to be sandblasting, which depending on the size of your project could take a few minutes, could take several hours. It also depends on how many parts you sent. If you sent your whole interior of your car, it could take half of a day to sandblast all that, just depending on how many parts it is. So after sandblasting, we've got to make sure there's no sandblasting dust or residue left on your project, make sure there's no static left on your project, and we have to set up a jigging system so that we can put it in the paint booth and hold it so that we don't touch the paint after we start painting. So painting and priming can take anywhere from a few minutes up to several hours, depending. And if you have a lot of parts on your project or you have parts that have to be coated in different colors, it can take an entire day just in paint booth work. After your part's been primed and painted, we like to give at least half of a day to a full day of paint drying time before we actually start dipping your project. So what I'll do is I'll set up our day to where we may be prepping in the morning, painting in the afternoon, allow it to dry overnight, come in the next day and start dipping your project. So if you watched last week's video on 5 things you didn't know about hydro dipping, we talked about our paint in there. And with the paint, we have sometimes up to 2 weeks to dip your project. So if we get tied up one day, right after we painted your project, we can wait several days and it's not a big deal. Typically, we like to paint and then dip the very next day. For the dipping process, again, this really depends on what size your project is, how many parts there are, and if there's multiple pieces that are going to be dipped in different patterns. This can take as little as an hour up to several days worth of work. Really just depending on the size of your project. After everything goes from the dipping tank to the rinse tank, we've got to make sure that all the parts are rinsed off. They have no PVA left on them. That usually takes at minimum 5 to 10 minutes, and then it has to air dry before we can move on to the next step. My personal preference is to let everything air dry for at least 24 hours before we go back and start on your project. That way we can make sure there's absolutely no moisture left over and we can move on to the final step, which is going to be clear coat. Now, clear coating is a lot like painting. We're going to go back into the paint booth. We're going to apply your choice of clear. Really just depends on how many parts you have and how many coats of clear it's going to need. If it's flat, it's 1 coat and done. If it's a gloss finish, it could take several coats. We may have to wet sand in between, depending on how flat your project was to start out with, and we may have to build up additional coats later on. The key with clear coat is how long it cures after we get done clear coating it before we send it back to you or before you come and pick up your project. Bare minimum, I will ship anything that's been clear coated as 5 days. I wait 5 days to make sure it's completely cured before I put it in a box and send it back to you. So as you can see, our bare minimum time for getting a project done is about 2 weeks. Up to about 3 weeks is normal. So now let's talk about things that make the process take longer than they should. The number one thing is going to be existing coatings. If you have something that's been previously painted, it's got some type of powder coating on it, or like with firearms, we've got these really thick nitride coatings or some other type of coating on it. All those coatings have to be removed and got down to bare substrate, whether that be metal, plastic, glass, whatever it is, before we can start our part of the process. Depending on what the coating is, sometimes that can take several days to remove, whether we have to soak it in chemicals just to get all that stuff off, use paint strippers, sandblasting. That stuff takes a long time. But if you want your project back faster, you need to have those removed before you ship them to us. The second thing is going to be damaged parts. If you want your project to look nice and smooth, we have to fix all of that stuff before we can start hydro dipping it. So if you got like a wood stock with a little ding in it, we're going to have to go in and do some wood filler, sand all that out, reseal it, and make sure that it's not going to absorb any water. And then we can go ahead and start our process. The other area where we run into this a lot is junkyard parts. People will go to junkyards, pull extra parts off for their cars, and a lot of times they'll have dings and dents and scratches and stuff in them. All that stuff has to be fixed before we can move on with the project. The third thing is going to be request for samples. If you want to see a sample of your project before we dip it, we don't mind doing that. We do charge for it. We don't do it for free. But if we don't already have a sample made up of what you want, like say you picked a custom color and then you want a candy coating on top of your dip, that is stuff that we need to make a sample for so that you can see it before we do it on your project. Which, that's all fine and good. We have no problem doing it, but it does take an extended amount of time because you have to take the regular dipping process, however long that takes, just to make a sample, add that on to your project time, and now you're looking at several weeks up to a month before we can even get your project done. Again, we don't mind doing it at all. It's not a problem, but you have to have a realistic time frame for how long it takes us to make samples and do your project. Number 4 is going to be changing your mind in the middle of a project. We have had this happen more times than I would like to admit to, but yes, it does happen. We will get halfway through someone's project, we're dipping it, and then at the last minute, they change their mind and say, oh, well, I want this pattern instead of this pattern. Well, guess what? We have to remove everything that we've already done and go back and start from square one. It's got to be repainted, redipped, and then we can finally move on to clear, which takes more time and in turn, longer before you get your project back. The fifth thing is going to be custom decals, custom water slides, and logos and things like that. Those things have to have stencils made for them. I don't make stencils here in-house. We have someone that does that for us. So I have to get in touch with them, give them the design, have it cut out of vinyl, or if it's a water slide decal, we have to make those. And most all of that is done after the dipping process is done, right before clear coat. So for instance, you want something airbrushed on your gun. No problem, we can do that. But after we dip it, we've got to wait for it to dry, do the airbrushing, remove the stencils, and then wait for the airbrushing paint to dry before we can move on to clear coat, adding a minimum of another day to the time that your project gets done. So custom things like that do take just a little bit longer to complete, but it's well worth it in the end. The customer just has to be patient and understand that custom stuff takes longer to make. Something else that makes projects take a little bit longer than normal is if you have multiple parts that are getting dipped in multiple patterns or parts that are going to have multiple base coat colors. It's a lot easier for us to sit down and do an entire project all in one base coat color and all in one pattern, but we do get requests often to do things in different patterns on different parts. No big deal, we can handle it. You just have to be understanding that it takes a little bit longer. And the last thing we're going to talk about that makes projects take a lot longer than normal is when the customer calls and asks me every 5 minutes, when's their project going to be done? I promise it will be done when it's done. Nah, I'm just kidding. Customer service is our number one priority. We want everyone to have clear communication with us. We want to be able to communicate back and forth with you. That's not a problem at all. But if I'm in the middle of working on your project and I have to stop every 10 minutes and answer an email or a phone call about when's your stuff going to be done, that's time away from, when I could actually be working on your project. So if I tell you I'll have it done in 3 weeks, I'll keep you updated along those 3 weeks. You don't have to call every 5 minutes and ask, hey, when's my project going to be done? I told you it'd be done in 3 weeks. It's been 2 days. Calm down. I am really, really good about making sure that everyone is aware of what's going on with their project. So if there's something along the way that is going to make the process take longer than it should, I always call and let you know, or I'll text you or email you and let you know, hey, this is what's going on and this is how long it's going to be before we can get it done. So now I'm going to tell you guys about the seasons of the year and what times are extremely busy for us and what times are a little bit less busy for us. So let's start at the beginning of the calendar year, and we'll go from January until about March. So this part of the year is either the beginning of duck season for some states or the end of duck season for some states. We get a ton of duck hunters that want to get their guns dipped during this time. This is also right after Christmas. People have got their Christmas money and they want to spend it on getting something hydro dipped. Also, the closer we get to March, tax return money starts coming in, and a lot of people like to spend that on getting stuff hydro dipped. This is a fairly busy time for us during the year. From the end of March until about May, end of May, is the beginning and ending of turkey season, and it is also prime time tax season. This is when we get a crap ton of turkey hunters that are like, oh my God, it's turkey season starts tomorrow. I need to get my gun dipped today. Well, first off, that ain't happening, Scooter, because as we just learned, it takes several weeks to get done. So if you want to get your turkey hunting gun done, you need to get it done either at the end of December, beginning of January, so that you have it and have time to practice shooting and use your gun before March when turkey season starts. This is probably the second busiest time of the year for us. So from about mid to end of May up until August, this is, end of spring, early summer. People are out riding around on their cars, they're playing on their motorcycles, they're shooting their guns. All the stuff that we hydro dip on a regular basis are all toys to people. And people are out playing with their toys during this time, so we don't get as much hydro dipping work during the summertime. But on the contrary, this is our highest call volume and email volume time. During the summer, people are seeing stuff that's hydro dipped. They're watching videos online. They see us on YouTube. They see other people that get stuff hydro dipped, and they call and email and want to know pricing. And we spend a lot of time dealing with calls and emails during the summertime. We don't get as much work in because people don't want to have their stuff going for 3, 4, 5 weeks, just depending on how long their project takes. But we do have a really, really high call and email volume during the summer. Now, usually at the end of August, early September, here in Georgia at least, and I know a lot of other places, is when bow season and rifle season is starting to get ready or is about to open for deer. Well, as we just learned, you ain't gonna get your gun back on opening day if you give it to us the day before opening day of deer season. Just impossible. Ain't gonna happen. So if you've got a rifle, gun, or bow, or whatever you want to use for deer season, you need to come to us early in the summer so that we make sure that we can get your gun back to you or your bow back to you well before deer season starts, and you have time to practice, use your new gun or bow before season starts. And it doesn't matter how many times I explain this to people, the week of opening bow season here in Georgia and the week of opening rifle season here in Georgia is absolutely insane with phone calls and emails. So if it takes me a day or two to get back to you, it's because I have 500 other calls that I have to deal with that day. Sorry, just kind of how it is. And then our last season of the year is going to be the very end of November up until Christmas. This is our Christmas season when people want to get Christmas presents made for their friends and family and stuff like that. This is about on par with deer season. So we may have a little bit of a break at the end of November when things kind of slow down. Deer season's underway. People are out hunting. But then Christmas hits, and holy bat turds, Batman, we get busy. So as you can see, we've got some busy times of the year, we've got some not so busy times of the year, and we've got some, oh my God, why do I work here busy times of the year. Now, I will say that this year, 2020, has been a little bit different than other years because of all the COVID stuff that's going on. With the amount of gun sales being as high as they are right now, we've probably done more hydro dipping and Cerakote work on guns than we have in a long time. So we've been abnormally busy this year, especially for the beginning part of the summer, which we're not used to because in years past, it's been a little bit slower. But this year has been insane. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is something that we do get requests for every now and then, which is going to be rushed jobs. We do take rush jobs on a very limited basis, but there is a premium for it. It is going to cost you a lot of money to get something done in a rush. But as far as timeline goes, the absolute bare minimum that I can get a rush job done is 2 weeks. And that gives us time to get products in that we need for the materials for your project and the actual working time that we need to get everything done and get everything dry. Again, it's my personal preference not to be rushed on a job, but if you absolutely have to have something for like a car show or a trade show or something that you're going to and you need it quick, you've got to give us at least 2 weeks to get it done, and it's going to cost you. So that's kind of a down and dirty version of how things go around here, how long it takes to get stuff done, what our seasons are. But we do everything on a schedule. So if you call and you want to send in something to get dipped and I've got 15 projects in front of you, I may give you a time frame of 4 to 5 weeks because I know that we've got all this other stuff that we've got to get done first, and then yours will come next. So I hope that answered all the questions about how long Hydrographics takes and how long it takes us to do what we do. And don't forget to stick around to the end of the video, watch all of the funny bloopers. I hope that everyone enjoyed watching this video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit that thumbs up button if you like what you saw today, and we'll see you back here next week. We're going to be talking about what it, I ain't got the first line out. Like, this ain't starting good at all. Oh my God. 3 weeks, just depending on this can take as little as all those have to be removed and got down to the bare part of the project. The bare part of the project? Whatever. I do not like to ship anything unless the cure. I don't ship unless the cure. But you have to have what in the world? Realistic. I realistically cannot talk today. Customer service. But we do.